Howdy folks, and welcome back to CAD Foundations, and today we are going to be looking at a slicer software which is going to help you make some of your 3D creations a reality. So specifically today we're going to look at PrusaSlicer. PrusaSlicer is a pretty powerful one. The reason I'm picking that is because it's one of the more prolific, one of the more common slicers out there. It's based on the slicer architecture, SLIC3R architecture, which is one of the older slicers out there. And then Prusa built on it with PrusaSlicer, and then Bamboo built once again on that with their Bamboo slicer. But it's one of the more common ones, and generally speaking, if you learn one slicer software, it's just a matter of learning a slightly different place to click to learn another software. Like, for example, going to Slicer to PrusaSlicer to Bamboo Slicer, extremely easy transition. There are other slicers out there if you prefer. Chitubox is one. I haven't really used that one a whole lot. Cura I've used. That one's pretty good. But let's stick with Prusa because it's a pretty common one, and it does support a whole lot of printers. And make sure you look into what specific printer you have, because certain ones only accept certain proprietary slice files. Like I have the Formlabs Form 3, for example, and I have to use their proprietary slicer, any forms to slice for that one. But you can always use another slicer to slice and support, export it as a G-code, import it so you don't have to put supports on if a certain slicer has supports you like more. But I digress. Let's get into PrusaSlicer. So this is one I already have set up with some of the printers I use around here. But when you first download and install PrusaSlicer, you won't have anything set up. If you need to set a few more things up, you can go to Configuration Wizard. But the first time you open up PrusaSlicer, it'll already be there. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our Configuration Wizard here. Any minute now, buddy. All right, here we are. So it'll give you a welcome. Over here, there are not a lot of things you need to do. Of course, you can follow through with the whole welcome and setup, but I will go ahead and skip you to the steps that you're actually going to need. So myself, for example, I know that I am going to be using PrusaSlicer, so I'm going to jump into the Prusa section, and then you have options of all their printers here. So I'm just going to select the ones I have. I have the Mark 3.5 upgrade kit with the input shaper. I have the Mini with the input shaper. I have the Mark III with the input shaper. And then we're good to go on Prusa. Prusa SLA, I don't have any of those, so we're good to skip over that. I also think potentially some other slicers are better for SLA than Prusa, but it does do a decent job. But we're going to look into other FFF printers. The one I went ahead and installed was, I have some Anycubics around here. So you pick whatever you have. Say you had Cocoa Press or a Creality. You could select those. Go to the next screen, and then it's going to give you options of selecting from there. I have already done so with the ones I have. If you had a Creality, you can do so there. After that, you don't really... I did install my Anycubic, my Anycubic Mono X on here. And it does do a pretty good job slicing for that, I will say. All right, so we don't really need a whole lot of these other settings. So right now, let's go ahead and just jump down to filaments. So within filaments, what I recommend is, for a lot of people just getting started out with 3D printing, you're pretty much just going to be printing PLA. So what I like to do is go into none and PLA. The generic PLA profile actually does a pretty good job. So I go ahead and just select that. If you do have certain brands that you have a stockpile of, do go ahead and pick those. Like for example, let's say I had a big stock of Prusa PLA, I could put that in. And the reason I recommend selecting none first and then just selecting a few PLA profiles is a lot of people, when they're just starting out, they will go to print something on PLA, but they'll do it on ABS or ASA or PETG settings. And the issue with that is those filaments run they run a lot hotter than PLA. Their melt temp is significantly hotter. So basically, if you run PLA on ASA settings, you are cooking up that PLA actually, instead of actually just printing with it. It'll just cook up right there in your nozzle, and some not so pleasant fumes will be released out in your workspace. So that's not optimal. And then from here, really, you can just go ahead and click finish. I already have mine set up, so I have things the way I want. So I'm just going to click cancel. And then it will bring you to the actual slice here, the actual slicer, what you're going to be using. So over on the right hand side, we have our settings. These default settings work quite well. 0.2 speed is my default one on my input shaper. I think it is the default one. Underneath your print setting, and again, you can customize these if you'd like, but if you don't necessarily know what you're doing, it's good to stay with the defaults. If you want to learn how to do that, a lot of Redditors or people on your printer's forums tend to have some pretty good print profiles that they've created. So you can kind of go in and copy those settings and then tweak them based on your print, how your print comes out. But if this is your first print, just stay with the default setting. Underneath that, you've got your filaments. If you just did generic PLA, that'll be the only option. But these are some filaments that I print with, which is why I have those installed. And then your printer underneath that. Just select the printer you want to do. And again, you have some other printers. It's not just Prusa that you could use on PrusaSlicer. For example, I use it with the i3 Mega. And you will, the cool thing that PrusaSlicer does is it actually replicates the bed you're looking at. So if I know I meant to select the mini and I see this Anycubic logo down here, I know that's not right. So let's go ahead and I'll stay with the mini with the input shaper. So let's go ahead and throw something on here to start slicing. So there's a few ways you can do this. One way, you can just grab something from an open document window and drag that onto your plate, and that will do it. Alternatively, what you could do is the only button that'll be active is add. And add basically lets you input that file. So we'll just stay with a stock generic phone case. So the phone case, this one did happen to import in an optimal way. So basically this one, I could print this as is. I would just click on the preview button, which is actually what slices it. And slicing, if you didn't already know, is basically dividing your file into as many layers as needed. In this case, they're 0.2 millimeter layers, and slicing them up into, in this case, 57.2 millimeter layers, and stacking them up on top of the other, and that's the foundation of your G code. So this one is good to go. It's not giving me any warnings. We have good bed adhesion, no supports needed. Let's say this were imported in a non-optimal way. So I'm going to go over here to the place on face button, and I'm going to flip this upside down. So if I were to slice this right now, I'm getting a print stability issue, and that's because the only bed adhesion I have is this little rim right here. And also I have a much, much, much larger bridge, and a bridge is an area between two walls of filament that it has to gap with a bridge. This huge bridge up here would be far too big, so that's no good. So ideally what we would want to do, lay it on that face, but let's say I had it on one of these faces and this was an item that I had no other way to print. I would go ahead and I would add supports. So by default, everywhere works perfectly well. That'll give you a perfectly good slice, but you are using a lot of filament with your supports, and that's what this in the green here is supports. So you're using a lot of filament, and you also have to go in and clean out all of those supports. So that's not optimal. Ideally, you want to find a way that doesn't need it. Another thing that will save you a little bit of filament and makes cleanup easier is by up here in the top right above where your print settings are. By default, you'll be in beginner mode. That restricts your options a little bit, which is fine. But I like to go into expert mode because that does give you a few more options. And one thing in expert mode that I recommend for most use cases is going into print settings, and conveniently, if you have your supports on, the support material will be highlighted in orange there for you, so it's easy to find, easy to click. And down here in the third section, very top option, most use cases, it tends to be better and so much easier to clean these supports off and remove them. A lot of times I don't even need any tools to remove them, is organic supports. Those work quite well. So we changed to organic supports, and then if we slice from there, it does take a little bit longer to generate the organic supports. But there you can see what organic supports do is they basically make little trees. It's kind of hard to see in this view, but I'd be willing to wager that if I placed it on the side here, you'd really be able to see what those organic supports do. See, we are using so much less filament, and this is going to be so much easier to take off as opposed to, let's go back, switch to grid or snug. Grid or snug works similar. It's just snug keeps it tighter. But let's slice that now, and now you're going to have to remove all of this from both sides. So that is significantly more annoying. I always recommend, again, there are use cases where snug and grid do work better, but for most, organic is the way to go. But yeah, this is, that is the basics. And right now we have an STL file imported. It is sliced, it is supported, it is good to go. Again, if you have an item that can print without supports, don't use them. Obviously, that is going to save you a lot of time. On this one, it wants to support this little ledge, but that ledge would actually be fine without supports. So I would print it out without supports. And that saves you a significant amount of time and some filament too. For example, let's just go back to how we had it previously, and let's put our supports back on. So we were at 40 minutes. And now if we look at our print time, we have gone from 40 minutes to 2 hours and 10 minutes. So orienting yourself in an optimal position is important. But I reckon that's about all we need to do for this video. You are good to start printing your basic items. I will have a video coming out very soon here that will show you some of the more advanced features of the slicer and allow you to do some things without even 3D modeling software. Just within the slicers, there's ways to add and remove primitives that are kind of neat, text that's kind of neat. But we will get into that next time around. But thank you ever so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.